Getting the correct size bike is of massive importance as it will have an effect on your stability, your comfort, the performance of the bike and your overall fatigue levels. Get it right and you will definitely be able to ride better. This video then covers how to get the correct size e-bike. Some brands are able to give recommendation on frame size whilst others do not, in which case you can get some advice from a shop, but this kind of varies in terms of the reliability and the experience of who you're talking to. Now, some brands are very clear on their frame size and actually very accurate, but what we're going to prove in this video is how you cannot make generalizations, the danger of making generalizations, and how frame size varies from brand to brand. Now, before we begin, I want to make it clear we are talking frame size here, not fit, because fit can be adjusted by your bar and your stem and your seat position in its rails. Now, we're coming at frame size from a ride dynamic point of view because it really can compromise your handling. The first geometry number we're going to be looking at is the reach measurement. Now, this is specific to each different frame size. And what it is, it's the number from the center of the head tube across and down to the center of the bottom bracket. Now, from the many bikes I've ridden, I can give you a kind of generalization on this number. I'm 6 foot and I normally ride about a 480 millimeter reach, give or take, 10 or 15 millimeters either side of that. So from that, you can say that if you're 5'10", then maybe 460 is a good number. What I'll also say is that whilst reach measurement is a really, really good yardstick on frame size, it cannot be looked at in isolation. You have to look at all the other geometry figures in conjunction with that number to get the perfect bike, the perfect fit. Okay, second up is the top tube measurement, which again changes between brands and between frame sizes. Now, it's a number between the center of the head tube across to the center of the seat tube. And of course, it's going to be affected by such things as the seat tube angle. What effect it has on your riding is that it's going to definitely have an impact on your comfort, especially when climbing steep climbs. It can be adjusted by changing your bar and stem or you position your seat in the rails. If you do that, what you have to kind of bear in mind is the fact that if you kind of have a shorter stem, it's going to push your weight further back, which means your front end is going to be quite light. Whereas if you move your seat forwards, it's going to push your weight over the front, which means it's going to affect your steering in that respect. So yeah, whilst it's a static number, your top tube can be changed by your kind of fit in the cockpit area. So number 3 is the seat tube length, which is from the center of the bottom bracket to the top of the seat tube. Now again, this is static and it varies from brand to brand and from frame to frame. What impact does it have? Well, naturally, when you're kind of stood up, kind of doing descents, you really don't want that seat to kind of get involved. So what's really important here is if all else is good on the bike, you need to make sure that you can drop that seat low enough to make sure it's comfortable on descents. And what you have to bear in mind is that this distance between the top of the seat tube and the top of the seat actually varies between what seat dropper you have in the bike. So that's a really important thing to consider when you're buying your bike. Now, wheelbase is also a very simple number and it kind of varies from brand to brand and from frame size to frame size. It's measured from the front axle to the rear axle. In general, a long wheelbase bike is going to create a more stable ride, whereas a short wheelbase, a more kind of nervy ride. However, it's not quite as straightforward as that, as the wheelbase is closely associated with some other geometry numbers, such as the head angle, the bottom bracket, and the type of suspension design on that bike. Now, what you're trying to achieve ultimately, if you go into the nitty-gritty, is a good balance between the front end of the bike, which is from the front axle to the bottom bracket, and the rear of the bike, which is from the bottom bracket to the rear axle. What you're trying to get there is a good balance between your kind of weight on the handlebar and your front tire and your weight on the rear wheel. Now, it's really important you get that balance, and it's very subtle. It's really fine. It's all about fine tuning, but get it right, and I guarantee you that you will enjoy your riding more. Okay, let's have a look at some of the key geometry numbers between the brands and between sizes, how they compare, how they differ, and how that can help you choose the correct size e-bike for you. Some brands have sizes which range from small to extra large, whilst others do not. Now, it's really important you get your size right and not be forced into getting a bike that's too small or too big for you just because there is only one left in the shop. Now, for example, the average height of a UK male is about 5'8" to 5'9". So in my books, that rider should be on a size medium. So what it also means, if you're 5'10", you should really be on a size large. And I see so many people getting this wrong. So my general kind of recommendation then as a baseline is that if you're 6 foot or over, you should usually be on an XL. If you're 5'10" to 6 foot, you should be looking at a large. If you're under 5'9", on a medium, and if you're under 5'5", you should be on a small. So it's big generalization, and we'll get into the nitty gritty later on in this video. Okay, the sizes I just gave you there are a general ballpark figure. Now, all I'm going to now is the size differences between each brand. Now, this is where it gets slightly more complex. For example, the size large from one company might actually kind of measure up the same as a size medium from another company. Okay, let's have a look at a few examples then based on my height of 6 foot between a few brands. Now, the Trek Powerfly comes up with a reach measurement, that number I talked earlier, of 473 millimeters. At the same time, the Mondraker Crafty in the same size comes up with a reach measurement of 492 millimeters. Now, that's for both size large bikes, and obviously there's quite a big difference there. Now, the good thing is that both companies recommend my height at 6 foot that I go for a size large. The big question is, which company is right? Well, in this respect, they both are. Like I mentioned earlier, my kind of ideal kind of ballpark reach number at 6 foot was 480 millimeters. So the Trek's maybe a little bit small, and maybe the Mondraker is a little bit big, but nevertheless, they both bang on for my size. Now, you're gonna be asking me, why are both brands correct given the difference in size? Well, it's quite simple. The Mondraker Crafty comes with a 30mm stem up front, whereas the Trek Powerfly comes with a 60mm stem. So that slight shortfall on the frame size of the Trek is actually made up for by the slightly longer stem. Should I then apply the same idea to other brands? Well, the simple answer is yes, you should. However, size large in another brand might actually come up smaller in numbers than on that Trek and that Mondraker. So do you actually simply add a longer stem then? Well, no, not necessarily. For example, the Specialized Kenevo, which I ride, is a 478mm reach measurement, which as it turns out is in between that Trek and that Mondraker. But Specialized also recommend that I'm in between a large and an extra large. So actually, the number comes out bang on. Now, the Kenevo is actually a good example of a rider being on the cusp, on the kind of boundary of range sizes. And that happens with other brands all the time. For example, that Trek Powerfly, which I mentioned earlier. Now, Trek recommend that that bike in size large should fit a rider between 5'9" and 6'1". So take the Don, Neil Donahue, my colleague, he's 5'10", so he'd be at one end of the size large spectrum, and me at 6 foot would be at the other end of the size large spectrum. So you could say that, you know, the Don could put on a shorter stem and I could put on a longer stem, and it's kind of, you know, all kind of, you know, that's where the fine tuning comes in. So the big message here with the differences between frame sizes of each brand is, do not make the generalization made on small, medium or large or extra large, because all frames are not made equally. Now, one thing to bear in mind when you're choosing the frame size of your new e-bike is how much of an effect familiarity has had on your choice of bike size. Now, I see a ton of people riding bikes that are too small for them, and sometimes they say, well, yeah, I just like a nippy bike. Now, don't underestimate how much adaptation has taken hold of you in getting used to your bike. I think maybe 4 or 5 times you ride your bike and you actually get used to it quite a lot. So what I'm suggesting is don't base your kind of purchase on what bike size you've had before. Now, I hear a lot of people say, well, I actually like a nippy bike anyway. Now, nippy is okay if you can ride in maybe between 1 to 2 minutes, but where kind of a bike that's too small for you has an effect, and a negative effect, is when you go past the kind of 3-4 minute mark where you're trying to compensate from a bike that's too small from you. The bottom line here is that don't underestimate how quickly adaptation takes hold of you with your bike size. I think maybe only 4 or 5 runs and you're quickly adapted to that size bike. That doesn't necessarily mean to say it's the right size bike for you. Now, a question I get pulled up on a lot of the time is, what if you're kind of 6'2" and over? Well, that's a really difficult question to answer. Now, the good news is lots of e-bike brands make size XL, but the kind of taller you get, the only kind of recommendation I can give really is that you adjust the fit of the bike. So in that way, I mean kind of lengthen the kind of where the position of the seat is in the rails, and also fit a longer stem, not too long, and also a kind of higher and wider bar. It's surprising what effect a kind of 780 or 800mm bar does on the kind of on your fit in the cockpit area. Now, something I also get asked is, what about if a bike is too big for me? Now there's a really kind of bad misconception here in size large bikes. They aren't actually too big or too cumbersome. It comes back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of adaptation. You simply kind of need to kind of ride it a little bit more, maybe fit a kind of 30mm, kind of 40mm stem on it, and it all kind of makes sense. Also, like I said, kind of if you kind of, it depends on your size. If you've got narrow shoulders, then maybe fit a slightly narrower bar, like a kind of 760. Now, one key part which I haven't discussed is the seat height. So assuming you've gone for the slightly larger size bike, what you need to really make sure is you can actually get the seat low enough in the frame for when you descend in, and when you kind of, maybe if you're sat on the bike as well. So if you cannot do that, then you might need to reconsider your frame size. Now, the bottom line, I think, is you need to find an e-bike shop that's got really good experience and also has a demo fleet so you can try out the different size bikes. You know, if you're on the verge of a kind of medium and large, you need to be able to try it. You need to be able to try different handlebar size, try different stem size on the larger bike, make a shorter stem on the larger bike to see how that feels like. So that's wrapping up things on choosing the correct size frame from Race Coast Cycles here in Stourbridge. Yeah, it's actually good to go to a kind of reputable dealer and someone who's got good knowledge of e-bikes to help you in this process. If you think we've missed anything out, please get in touch on the comments below. We're happy to get back in touch with you on that. If you want to get something more detailed on motors, click on the fundamentals up here, and similarly on battery fundamentals down here. Yeah, please give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe.